It was a 7-month scorched earth strategy that led Pierre Poilievre to the top spot in the Conservative Party as leader. Can he turn that into a federal election victory? Hello and welcome to Unpublished TV. I'm Ed Hand. The member from Carleton was first in the race and had an insurmountable lead he would not relinquish. Almost 70% of members supported him, giving a first valid victory. And let's face it, Poilievre was in control from the outset, drawing big crowds and turning his eye not only on the other contenders, but of course, the Prime Minister as well. Our Unpublished Media poll asked, can a Pierre Poilievre-led Conservative Party win the next federal election? And over 3/4 feel yes. Just over 20% said no, and 2.5% were unsure. However you're watching or listening to our show, whether through our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, or our podcast channels, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and more, I'd like to remind you can still cast your vote on this topic at Unpublished Vote, and then email your MP to tell them why. It's our new portal for political discussion and debate. Joining us to discuss the leadership campaign and where this leads the Conservatives, I'm pleased to be joined by Darrell Bricker, CEO with Ipsos Public Affairs, Warren Kinsella, political commentator, former advisor to Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. Laurie Turnbull is the director in the School of Public Administration at Dalhousie University, and Gary Keller is with Strategy Corp and former chief of staff to John Baird and Rona Ambrose. And Darrell, in your eyes, was there ever any doubt about the results on Saturday night?
No. I mean, there was no evidence through the course of this entire campaign that there was actually a campaign happening. I mean, every time everybody would start to talk about this idea of a battle for the soul of the Conservative Party or whatever, it was like, folks, that battle took place in probably 2002, 2003, all the way back to 1993. I mean, that idea that there was this, winning coalition of moderate conservatives out there that was only waiting for its champion to emerge is really, I think, a hyperactive part of the Laurentian elite mindset that exists exists mostly in Ottawa that was never really germane in this contest. It really was, I'd say, a very strong endorsement of not even a new direction, but a continuation of the path that Stephen Harper was on when he was the leader of the Conservative Party previously. So I never saw the Charest campaign as viable. There was no evidence anywhere that you could find that they were really putting up a good fight. I really think that these decisions were made a long time ago about what the future of the Conservative Party was going to be. And they were just looking for, from their perspective, who the right person was going to be. And for the moment, it seems to be Pierre Poilievre.
Laurie, in Atlantic Canada, 3 of the 4 premiers identify as progressive conservative, which is a little different than Poilievre's conservatism. How does he make inroads there, or does he?
Well, as you say, 3 of the 4 premiers are progressive conservative, but I would say that all of them in their own way, I mean, they distance themselves, especially Tim Houston, from the federal Conservatives, but they also see themselves as kind of post-partisan. They don't go in with a kind of partisan bent on anything. I think Tim Houston in Nova Scotia wants to be a premier for everybody. He's absolutely willing to abandon and shift around between positions. And that's sometimes in response to public pressure. It's sometimes because the parties are so close together that there's not very much space between them. And so a shift from one policy to another is actually not very far. And I think, someone like Dennis King, I heard him speak in Prince Edward Island this past weekend. He talks about how he works with the opposition parties to be able to pull them together. And I've seen his budgets pass with almost unanimous support in the House. So it's interesting to look at the differences on a progressive conservative versus conservative lens. It's also interesting to look at what's happening politically in Atlantic Canada, which is actually quite different, I think, than what's going on at the federal level. As far as Pierre Poilievre's popularity in Atlantic Canada, that would be a major climb. There would be a significant shift that would have to happen in order for him to become popular in that part of the country. That said, it might not matter because people are going to look at the candidate, as people often do. Incumbency is a big deal in Atlantic Canada. So I don't know if he has to so much find a way to sell himself as he does find the right candidates to run in the ridings and look for the ones he might be able to win.
Warren, Pierre had a pretty sizable victory on Saturday. He's embraced the convoy. He's embraced the anti-vax types. Is this a move to attract PPC supporters? And if so, can it backfire?
Yeah, he's been doing that for a while. In full disclosure, I had the great fortune of being sued by Maxime Bernier and defeated him. But yeah, I think that's what he's been doing. It makes no sense to me because, as we've talked about on your show before, Trudeau crafted this deal with Singh, and they kind of moved that operation over to the left and put up a whole bunch of political real estate in the middle that the Conservative Party could avail itself of. Because I certainly agree with what Daryl has said, that that old progressive Conservative Party that Laurie was talking about in Atlantic Canada kind of doesn't exist anymore. But I mean, politics is about opportunity. If your opponent vacates the center, it's in your interest to take some advantage of that. And I find it bewildering that Poilievre, at least so far, has not only said he's not going to do that, he's against doing that. He's moving out to the right. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but we live in a weird time. So who knows? Maybe he can pull it off. I don't think so, but maybe he can.
Gary, unity is going to be job one for Pierre Poilievre. And do you think it can be done, or is it going to be a my way or the highway approach?
Well, that's a good question. I think unity is already baked in with the result the other night. 68%. Mr. Poilievre did have almost half, I think just over half of the elected caucus of the Conservative Party. And even we saw people like Mike Coates, who was the co-chair of the Charest campaign. We saw Joël Godin, who notoriously said he didn't know if he could sit in a Pierre Poilievre caucus. All of them today are saying it's Pierre Poilievre's party. I liked what I heard on Saturday night in his speech, some of the policy planks and some of the hope and opportunity versus some of the other messages that he had, where it's very clear with the result that unity is baked in here. And there is no leader of the intra-party opposition to Poilievre. I said to people, Jean Charest is not going to stick around if he loses. He's going to go back to the private sector, as he has every right to do. I give him full credit for putting his name forward and for standing up for the principles he espoused. But at the end of the day, unity is baked into the result. And it's the result that, frankly, I felt was almost inevitable from the start, because it's what the caucus wanted. After two leaders that had trouble communicating their way through it. Whether you like Pierre Poilievre's message or not, he, to the caucus anyway, is willing to stand up and speak up for small C conservative principles. And frankly, I think that's what a lot of the caucus and a lot of the membership, including the new membership, were really looking for. They said, we tried it your way the last two elections. It didn't work. Let's try Pierre's way.
Daryl, what do you think? Is unity baked in with such stirring amount of support, or is that something that we're going to see down the line?
Well, I think it is, because I think the conservative movement in Canada has changed. I mean, I think when you go back to the history of the Conservative Party, the difference between conservatives and liberals, it was basically just a color. I mean, one wore blue and one wore red. That's what John Ibbitson and I wrote about in The Big Shift. And Stephen Harper changed that equation. And the reason that the equation changed is because the geography of political victory in Canada changed. So with the growth of Western Canada, there's now more people in Canada who live west of the Ontario-Manitoba border than east of the Ontario-Manitoba border. Inordinately now shifts, the political spectrum shifts more to the west and to the suburbs of Toronto. And as a result of that, the type of conservatism that seems to have more appeal, or at least did for Stephen Harper, and we'll see if it works for Pierre Poilievre, will be one that has more of an edge to it. And more of a Western type of an orientation. And it's simply a matter of geography. The other thing that's happened is that the contextual variables, and I'm a big proponent of standing back from the politics of the immediate term that we're in and focusing exclusively on personalities. I think we way over-torqued that kind of analysis, and really focusing on the context in which the next election will take place. And what we're looking at is very much a change election. I mean, we've had a government that's going to be running for its fourth election campaign that's not popular in this country, regardless of what's happening on the opposition side of the agenda. So there's a lot that actually favors somebody who looks more emphatically like change than somebody who's just trying to be safe change. Safe change, I find to be something that political consultants and media observers like to put out there as though it's something that the average person understands. And when people are voting for change, as we saw, for example, in the provincial election, not the most recent one in Ontario, but the previous one, Kathleen Wynne versus Doug Ford, and then we saw in the municipal election when Rob Ford won the election here in the city of Toronto, when people really want change, they hit a big red button. They really want to have change. So I think we need to take more into account the structural context that we're moving into, but also the political geography of the country, which has really changed a lot over the space of the last 50 years.
Laurie, it seems in these leadership races, candidates run to the edge, and then when they win, we talked about it, they move back to the middle, or most Canadians consider themselves. First off, do you expect Poilievre to move that way?
Well, I think that the way he's campaigning during the leadership has left him a lot of space not to have to pivot, but to just sort of back away a little bit from some of what he's talked about with respect to cryptocurrency and firing Tiff Macklem and things like that. He doesn't have to keep saying that stuff. He doesn't have to say he doesn't believe it anymore either. He can just sort of leave it there. And the stuff about freedom, he can easily map onto messages about cost of living, quality of life, whether you are living the kind of life you want. And people can be left to interpret those messages the way they want. And I think he's being cagey enough that he doesn't get pinned down easily. And I think the Liberals have totally missed an opportunity to push him and slam him a bit on reading between the lines in the language that he's using. So when he says plain language, what do you really mean? When you say freedom, what do you really mean? They're not, to me, they have not been effective at really holding him to account for the types of rhetoric that he's using. I don't think we're going to see a big pivot from him at all. I don't think we're going to see an Erin O'Toole thing. I think that he's in the right spot for the party. The Conservatives are in a good spot now. And if the Liberal NDP deal holds for a little while and Poilievre doesn't make a mess, he'll have an opportunity to let people get to know him and wait for people to get tired of Trudeau, which they already are.
Warren, you've run election war rooms before. Are the Liberals worried about a Poilievre victory, or are they salivating at taking on him and some of his views?
They're not worried. And it's a target rich environment, guys. You're all nice people, but I'm not a nice person. And so just imagine for a second, we'll craft an ad together. So I think you could do it in a 30, right? And it just starts off with, Ottawa 2022. And, you start off with somebody defacing the statue of Terry Fox and somebody urinating on the war memorial. Somebody screaming at people in the streets of Ottawa because they're wearing a mask, and abuse and violence and vandalism. And then you just cut to a shot of Pierre Poilievre sitting with those same people, having a good chuckle and smiling. What I do in campaigns is I tell stories, and I tell stories about things people either have forgotten about or they don't know about. And this guy is an unknown quantity. For sure, Conservatives feel they know him, but I'm telling you, I did Stockwell Day, I did Campbell. This guy has got multiple vulnerabilities. And at a minimum, I think he is going to stampede New Democrats into voting Liberal, whether Trudeau's there or not, because he has just got too many opportunities for the Liberal war room to go after him. And I don't think they needed to do that during the election, the leadership campaign, because the Liberals wanted him to stick around. He was a much better target for them than Charest or Brown were.
Gary, did this leadership contest ever discuss policy or issues, or was it just dragged out in slogans and smear? I didn't hear a lot of discussion.
Well, to Warren's point earlier about the campaign, I think, frankly, the Conservatives clearly want Mr. Poilievre to be the leader. And I think it's the battle that Conservatives want, but it's also the battle that Liberals want. They want this battle head to head with Pierre Poilievre. I think they're salivating at it. I think they're raring to go. And I do think they have held their powder dry in the short term, because I think there is a target-rich environment there. We'll see if they can deliver on that. But I'm sure Mr. Poilievre and his team are awaiting those hits to come. But to your question, I think Mr. Poilievre had very broad strokes during the leadership on policy issues, really focusing on big picture issues about cost of living, housing, talking about the gatekeepers, getting the gatekeepers out will lower the cost of living. But I actually heard more in terms of substantive policy in his victory speech on Saturday night than I frankly did hear all through the leadership campaign. He talked about oil and gas and pipelines. We didn't talk about Alberta oil and gas pipelines. He talked about Newfoundland and Labrador. He had a big section in his speech en français about liquid natural gas in Quebec. Didn't talk about it anywhere else, en français, and made the pitch to Quebecers about making them maître chez nous on energy issues. So I did hear a lot more in that speech, more detailed than I did throughout much of the campaign, and we'll see how much that carries on, especially over the next weeks and months.
Darryl, the Liberals are propped up by the NDP right now, and do you feel that arrangement will continue until 2025 to control the narrative, or is Jagmeet Singh on Tinderhooks right now?
Oh, I think Jagmeet Singh, although he never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. NDP leaders really have a choice now, right? So we've seen two different versions of the NDP. There's the Ed Broadbent version, which is I don't care if I lose as long as I'm the conscience of Parliament in a minority administration. And then you saw the Jack Layton view, which was, I actually think I can displace the Liberal Party. Jagmeet Singh had the chance to be the progressive champion in the country, and he decided to, aim lower and become what he's become in this Liberal administration. It will be interesting to see if the Liberal numbers start dropping. So the Liberals and the Tories are basically tied about now. So they're both around 32 or something like that, depending on the week that you look at the polling. It doesn't mean anything until we start seeing the effect of Poilievre. But if we start to see the Liberals dropping in terms of popular support, it might be interesting to see if Jagmeet Singh is really committed to this relationship as he's indicating. And one other point I'd like to add, I'm not a big believer in campaign tactics. I think most of them are just basically narratives that people tell themselves about the effect that they've had in campaigns. I don't think ads make that much of a difference the way that they used to. I mean, most of the examples that were just cited were 20 years ago. I think that the truth of what's going to happen in the next campaign is it's going to be a change in election, and it's really going to be about authenticity. It's really going to be about, is somebody authentically what they say that they are? And this is where Warren's point is absolutely spot on. The next battle is going to define the real Pierre Poilievre. And yeah, some of it's going to be, some of the stuff that's the easy pickings. But in some ways, that kind of makes him authentically a bit of a change. I think that the Liberals have this view that everybody sees things the way that they see them. I don't think that that's the case. I saw the same campaign run against Stephen Harper in 2006 by the brainiacs that were all around Paul Martin, and it completely failed. So sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I saw the George Smitherman guys do the same thing to Rob Ford. I saw the Kathleen Wynne people, interestingly enough, the same people as the Paul Martin people, back in when Doug Ford won the provincial election in this campaign. And I'm sure there's many citations that we can give in this group. The reason that those people won, even though the media and other people found them as unpalatable changes, is they were seen as authentic. And that's where Pierre Poilievre has a chance here. If he can present himself as an authentic change, even though they've all these other things that are around him, and he's going to have some explaining to do, as they say, he's in a better position than Aaron O'Toole or Andrew Scheer were to really challenge the Liberals. So I don't think he's as vulnerable as some of this analysis might suggest.
Where does, from your perspective, where does Quebec play into this right now?
From my perspective, the geography of Canadian politics has changed. It's not about Quebec anymore. Yeah. If the Liberal Party and the Bloc Québécois split Quebec, it doesn't matter. Stephen Harper won a majority with 5 seats in Quebec. The whole battle is the 7 or so seats that sit around the Greater Toronto area. Aaron O'Toole came so close. He came so close. If he would have, he split the difference overall in the province with the Liberals by half. He reduced the lead by half from what Andrew Scheer had. If he would have just picked up 3, 4, 5 more points in the 905, he would have won the most seats, not by a little, by a fairly large amount. Don't know if he would have been able to form the government, but he was that close. So the question is, can Pierre Poilievre win that 3, 4, or 5 in that place? What happens in Quebec, as long as the pattern on the ground remains the Liberals representing the Federalist option and the Bloc Québécois representing everybody else, it almost takes itself off the table in terms of forming the national government, unless it's the Liberals that are in the lead.
Laurie, getting that extra 3 or 4% that Daryl talks about, we talk about the middle of the political spectrum seems to be alienated right now, and getting part of that would certainly help him. I'm kind of wondering, has the middle moved to one side and the other, like just basically split to the other, and there's really not much of a middle anymore?
I don't get that sense, actually. I don't think that's really true. I think that there is a palpable sense of I think compassion and social capital, especially in the aftermath of COVID-19. I think if you're seeing a kind of some consensus existing around the center, the fact that the party system doesn't match it is a problem for the party system in terms of the responsiveness and the democratic check between what parties are doing and what the people want. If there's a gap there, that's an indication of a problem. And it also means that we see this amplification of fringe views now, and not an appropriate filtering system in the middle to weed out the ideas that people actually don't support all that much, right? Like, we're seeing ideas that are actually not super popular look very popular because there's not the middle to, and the majority voice. Not that the majority always gets it right, but there's not that kind of consensus around common sense to drown out some of the ideas that are actually not great. And so I don't know. I mean, I think it raises some questions around the relevance of formal politics. It raises questions around whether people really see formal politics as offering any solutions to their problems. I think that Tim Houston and Doug Ford and some others are onto something when they try to pitch messages that are not really partisan, and they're more about being some sort of response to whatever is plaguing the population at the time.
Warren, I'm wondering, we asked the question, do you think Pierre Poilievre Conservative Party could win the next federal election? And I guess right off the bat, do you think that that's a possibility?
Well, sure. Weird things happen. Joe Clark became prime minister and defeated, Pierre Trudeau. Yeah, weird stuff can happen. But, I regard Poilievre as a vulnerable candidate. I'm no fan of Justin Trudeau, as you guys know, but I think, Poilievre's the wrong guy to get him out. I think, the Conservative Party has underestimated Trudeau 3 elections in a row, including with their deity, Stephen Harper, and, Trudeau's beaten them. Trudeau's figured out, to Daryl's point, is, he doesn't need 100%. He just needs what he needs to win. And so last time, he called the election that nobody wanted or needed, but he zeroed in on the gun piece in the Tory platform. He zeroed in on the anti-vax lunatics in the Tory caucus, and it got him what he needed with suburban women, in the 905 area that Daryl described. So, I think Canadians are going to be finding stuff out about this guy that they're not going to like. And does it view emerging that the center doesn't exist? The center does exist. I was campaigning for the Democrats in the States just a couple of weeks ago in a Republican stronghold, the Bush's stronghold in Maine. And what I was getting at the doors is January 6th and the efforts to overturn the election. So that kind of right-wing radicalism and the abortion piece. And Biden may have been heading for a slaughter in November in the midterms. He's not anymore, because that Conservative Party, the Republican Party, went too far to the right. And my view is that's happened with the Conservative Party of Canada. I understand they feel that, Scheer and O'Toole were mushy. I don't think they were. I think they were decent men, but they've gone too far to the right. And now they've got a great distance to run back, and I don't think it's going to be credible.
Gary, do you think that?
Sorry, can I just say one quick thing?
Yeah, no problem.
And then over to Gary. I'll shut up.
Sure.
Let me challenge that. That's not what happened in the election. I mean, we were tracking, I'm not going to use my opinion, I'll just use data. What happened in the federal election? Hardly anything moved on policy. People were really paying that much attention to it. It wasn't an ideological battle at all. What happened was Aaron O'Toole was not able to convince in the last 2 weeks of that campaign people that he was actually going to win. That was the problem. He was not seen as a compelling candidate. He was not seen as somebody who was ready for that office. He was not able to create any type of bandwagon. So what happened was his voters didn't show up, or they voted for the People's Party because there was a free shot because Trudeau was going to win anyway. That's what happened in the campaign. As far as the U.S. is concerned, he's still going to take a pounding. The numbers haven't changed in the United States. I mean, this is the narrative that comes out of the New York Times and the Washington Post. Biden's numbers are terrible. I just looked at our polling. We're in every day for Axios. He's still below 40% in terms of his approval level. And the issues that are really motivating for the left in that campaign are well down the list in what motivates the general population in the United States. So I don't think that, public policy is going to be the big driver of what happens in this campaign. I think it's going to be authenticity and a feel. Does somebody actually represent the type of change that Canadians are prepared to accept? That's going to be the campaign. Anyway, Gary, I'll shut up now. Sorry, Warren, I'm cutting you off too. And Laurie, I apologize too.
Go ahead, Gary.
Far be it for me to get in between a fight between Daryl Bricker and Warren Kinsella.
Oh, we're not fighting. We don't.
No.
I'm right. He's wrong. It's okay.
If that's how you see it, Warren.
Okay.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think this is the great debate. I agree. I think there is a center, and I think with polarization in Canadian politics, where you have both a Liberal Party, which is polarized more to the left, and a Conservative Party that is now more on the right side, where they've clearly staked out ground. There will be a battle for the center vote, but it's not going to be in your traditional, mushy middle of the ground politics. It's going to be on those authenticity questions. And clearly, Mr. Poilievre thinks that, his hope and opportunity message and getting government out of your life is going to attract that sliver enough to get over the edge. And as well as attracting some of those PPC voters that may have voted Conservative in the past and may come back. And I think Mr. Trudeau thinks the same thing, that he can eke out enough of a micro-targeted group of people in key ridings across the country, and especially in the GTA, to pull that across. And so that battle will be for that group of voters in the middle and those key seats. But I don't think we're in an election anytime soon, i.e. this fall, but we'll see how long the deal lasts between Singh and Trudeau, and it could be maybe as early as the spring budget.
Well, folks, I want to thank you for joining us. Great discussion here on Unpublished TV. Joining us today, Daryl Bricker, CEO, Ipsos Public Affairs; Warren Kinsella, political commentator, former advisor to Prime Minister Jean Chrétien; Laurie Turnbull, the director of School of Public Administration at Dalhousie University; Gary Kellers with Strategy Corp and former chief of staff to John Baird and Rana Ambrose. And I want to thank you for watching Unpublished TV. Stay safe. I'm Ed Hand.